Good morning, good afternoon, everyone on the panel, participants that are present. Thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure to be here with a brilliant panelists, a brilliant panel to discuss privacy and discuss the leading women in privacy, or to be with leading women in privacy to discuss their journey, as well as to get some tips to discuss the challenges that have come along the way, and also how to get into the privacy space. So just to start off, I will introduce myself. I will be your moderator today for this panel. Should be about a 1 hour long session. My name is Rose Tsaaro. I am the Policy, Regulatory and Legal Advisor in the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. Well, for the rest of the week, from next week, I will be the Deputy Data Commissioner in the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner in Kenya. I have with me three leading women in privacy. I'll let each of them introduce themselves. I'll start with Nosipho Mbata, and then to Janine, and then lastly we will have Eddie Deong, Prince White. So Nosipho, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Rose. Good morning to everyone who is in this call today. My name is Nosipho Mbata. I'm passionate about the privacy, governance, and compliance. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about data privacy, and I'm looking forward to this conversation here today.
Thank you for that and welcome. Janine?
Good morning, everybody, and hi, and thank you for moderating for us, Rose. I'm Janine West. I have been in privacy for about the last 8 years. Obviously, when we're from South Africa, and when it was still in its infancy in the EU with the commencement of GDPR. Very excited to be here today, very passionate about privacy and looking forward to our discussion.
Wonderful, thank you and welcome, Janine. And last but not least, Eddie Deong, Prince White.
All right, good morning, everyone. I trust you can hear me now. My name is Eddie Deong, Prince White, currently the Data Protection Officer for TGI Group. I've been in data privacy for as long as it has been in Nigeria, since 2019. I'm very, very passionate about data privacy because data is the new oil, like the oil say. And I believe that as we have a conversation today around privacy, there will be one or two things that we'll all learn from each other. I'm excited to be with leading women in Africa in privacy this morning. Good to see you all.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you as well to the Tsaaro Academy team for putting this together. We probably wouldn't be here having this session without you. So just to set the stage, I'll tell you a bit about how the session will go. We will have a panel discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we'll leave 15 minutes for question and answers. If you do have any pressing questions to the participant, please feel free to put it in the chat. I might take some as we proceed with the session. But today, really, just to find out about the journey of this wonderful women that are here, especially in privacy. Privacy is relatively new in the African space. And so to find people who have been in this space for as long as the three panelists have been, it's great. And so we can learn a little bit from everyone. We're all in different countries as well. So it'll be good to gain the experience being in different regions and the like. One of the things that I'd like to know or to start with as we start this discussion is I can see that three of us here on the panel are actually have a legal background. Janine, I don't think you have a legal background, but for the lawyers here, Nosipho first, and then we'll go to Eddie Deong, and then Janine, we'll talk about your journey as well. How did you start your career in privacy?
Okay, so I think for me, I've always been looking at when I was working just predominantly legal work and as a lawyer, I was always looking for the type of job description that would allow me to tap into different operational scenarios and just not maybe play a reactive role, but just really get deep down into the initiation of the product process or the initiation of product development within an organization. So one of my passion is actually business. So I'm really interested in the operational scenario of businesses and how does business work. So my question then was, how do I, as a lawyer, combine my passion for business and understanding operations with my legal knowledge? Then the search started really just understanding risk and understanding why, as a risk professional, I needed to understand business, and it developed into compliance. So I then moved into studying compliance, and when then the privacy space was expanding, and in South Africa the POPI was about to come into effect. At that time, I was working with one of the leading banks here in South Africa, and I was part of their innovation team. That's when I was really required to advise on the new products and dealing mostly with privacy. But mostly, Rose, I think it's curiosity. It's understanding what are your passions and how do you combine them together. I knew that I did not want to just be one-mind lawyer, and it started there.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. It's always, I like the use of the term curiosity. Privacy does allow you to step into very many facets of operations. There's a lot that you need to understand, say for just the privacy aspect or the legal aspect. You also need to understand the products and the like. So thank you for that, Nasipo. It is Young.
Okay, for me, privacy started, just like I said, when the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation was passed. At the time, I was the compliance counsel, country compliance counsel for Lafarge Holcim. So it was a matter of necessity. All compliance officers had to also play the role of a data protection officer. And so during that process, good enough, I had colleagues in Switzerland, in other countries who have already been implementing the GDPR. So they served as our mentors, they trained us, and then during the process, I did my own research and I read because I love to read. I've been in various aspects of law. I had a lot of interest in this field. It's something very exciting. It has endless opportunities. There are many issues that come up apart from those that we learn in the process of getting certifications. There are a lot of legal privacy issues that we have to deal with. So for me, it was a matter of necessity. I had to ensure there was compliance, and then I got interested in it. And then good enough, I was able to implement the NDPR and GDPR standards in the business at the time. We even had to be audited by the KPMG Switzerland, and Nigeria was tops in terms of compliance. So privacy is here to stay, and I'm excited to be part of that field.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And Janine, to you, how did you get into this privacy field?
So for me, I've always had a passion for taking legislation and making it easier to understand, because growing up, I saw a lot of people sort of on the wrong side of it because they couldn't understand and couldn't interpret it. And unless you hired someone that cost you a lot of money, then you'd get a better understanding. So I was always passionate about taking things and making them simpler. I worked at one of the banks here in South Africa for 21 years, and my role at the banks was always taking pieces of legislation and making them understandable, implementing them within the business, and making it very practical. So making it operational. So I started with things like the anti-money laundering, the FICA legislation that came in. And that was a big step for business, because I think it was our first taste of a sort of a tough compliance, where you needed to spend a lot of time and a lot of money in making sure you got that right. And then I worked with various pieces of tax legislation, implementing that, making it operational. And then also working then when GDPR came into effect, the business had a European arm, so it was looking at how we implement that, and then also for South Africa with the extraterritorial scope. And I think I just fell in love with it then. I love the data protection side of things, and all things that relate to it.
Yes, it's very easy to fall in love with data protection. Just to give a background for me as well, I have a legal background. I'm a lawyer. Before I got into data protection, I was actually a litigation lawyer in Australia, and then decided to move to Kenya to do a consultancy on data protection because I had been doing some work in privacy. When the GDPR came into place, a lot of lawyers were forced to think about that aspect of compliance as well for many multinational organizations. And so that was part of my task. And so when I came to Kenya briefly, was meant to be 6 months. 6 months turned into 4 years now. 3 months into my 6 months, I was I poached to work for the cabinet minister of ICT and innovation, and the Data Protection Act was actually being drafted at the time in Kenya. And so I was part of that and the regulations as well. And even the implementing of the regulator or the establishing of the regulator that is currently here. And so privacy is a great space to be in. As the panelists have mentioned, it is a multifaceted area. And just to bring that into the fold, the Janine, Nosifo, and Edith Young have spoken about compliance with respect to part of the work that you do. What is some of the challenges that you find, especially given that privacy is very new in the African space? There's a lot of misunderstanding as to what privacy entails, especially even the costs. Some organizations might not want to implement privacy because of the cost of doing so. So I'll start with Janine, and then we can go to Nosifo and then Edith Young.
Thank you, Rose. I think you said it when you mentioned cost. I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, as we know, is the cost of compliance when we are doing business. So for me, that has definitely been a challenge, especially in a space. The PROPER Act took a while to come into effect fully. So it was very hard to get buy-in for something that you're waiting for. The way that I tackled it and the way that I think is the best to go was not looking at, you look at the cost and you don't want to, you need to implement, but it's also looking at what would the cost be if you didn't implement. So if you take away the legislative fines and penalties and you look purely at reputational cost, I think that's enough in itself. So that's always been a big thing for me, is saying to people, you want to use this as an offering, as something you can put forward and say, we strongly believe in protecting your personal information, your data. And that's always been the stance that I've taken, and that's helped a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. What about you, Nosifo? What are some of the challenges in the privacy field that you're experiencing?
I think for me, one of the biggest challenges is not being able to articulate the issues within an organization. So to treat a privacy legislation or requirements as if like it's a blanket sort of a statement. So being able to articulate the issues. So when you're doing your impact assessment, it's very important that you understand whether the issues and being able to identify the information that you have. So cleaning your data and understanding the information that you're dealing with, and try to eliminate the excessive processing of personal information. I think when these legislation came about, there was, sort of lack of awareness of the data that we have and how we process it. So when you then start with the impact assessment, it's very important to articulate the problems, understand the data, and eliminate the excessive processing of personal information. Then it becomes easier then to apply the principles that are in the data protection legislations.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Edith Young, what are the challenges that you faced?
Okay, so I started data privacy, like I said, just when the law was passed, and the Nigerian data protection regulation at the time, and still till today, has a little bit of lacunas. There's some questions: what do I do? What do I do? There's also the fact that in Nigeria we are very data driven. you want to open at the time, you want to maybe open an account somewhere and people be asking you the name of your grandparents, asking you for things that are not data that is not really relevant for the purpose for which you want to process it for. So having to change that culture was a little bit of an issue. And then the third part of it is working in a business. They are more financially driven. They want to see the numbers, they want to see the profit. How is data privacy compliance or compliance generally going to affect my bottom line? That is what business people want to see. So we had to really try to see a way of how to drive it down, what they would lose if they don't comply, why we need to comply. So basically, it was about culture change, enlightening stakeholders, because we all need stakeholders, especially those who process data, and then CEOs of businesses to buy into the idea of ensuring that their businesses are compliant. So basically what really helped was, like I said, I worked in a group. So policies were driven down from Switzerland. CEOs were bought in. It wasn't still easy because we still had to do a lot. We still had to come up with compliance committees where we could, train directors and make them understand what we stand to gain when we have our data processed in line with the law and regulation. So some other thing we did was we had to appoint data champions across the stakeholders, because as a data protection officer in most places in Nigeria, you might be the only person. So I had to appoint data champions across the group, those who process data. They are my eyes, my legs, so they see what's happening, what new technology is coming up in the business so that you can conduct a DPIA. And that really helped. They even helped with filling the data processing registers and all of that. So for us to be able to, steer through the turbulent waters and getting people's buy-in, we need to also involve them. When they get involved, then most of the challenges we face in implementing the data privacy would no longer be there. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that some of the challenges or there's a key undertone of the challenges that are being faced in terms of communication, in terms of aspects of awareness, and the like. It's no different, I guess, from a regulatory perspective. The challenges are very much the same. Being in the office of the regulator, a lot of the issues that we have is a lack of awareness as to, firstly, the existence of data protection laws, again, because they're very new, but also a lack of understanding as to what is expected of people. And it's good to see that this affects not only people in private sector, but regulators alike. One of the things I think that I'd like to understand, all of you have come into data protection, I guess, as the laws have come in place. Obviously, you didn't wake up with the expertise in data protection. What are the key things that you would tell someone who's entering into the data protection space that they should do, whether it's courses, whether it's certifications, whether it's mentorship, as Edith Young has mentioned, that was key to your journey. What advice would you give someone who's entering into the data protection space? I'll start with you, Edith Young, and then Janine, and then Nasipo.
Okay, so today we have a lot of certifications around. We have PCB, we have CIPP, and the exciting thing about the data privacy career is that it is not limited like some of our those of us from the legal background here in Nigeria. You can't move out to practice in the US. You have to pass certain exams, but it's much easier with data privacy. Get the certifications, even if you want to relocate to some other country. This is some course you need to get your certifications. Good enough, Tsaaro offers a lot of these courses. So you could also go to the IAPP site. So you could look through and see what field of data privacy, or you want to go into data privacy, you want to go into data security, cyber security. Pick out what you want to do and get the expertise. Secondly, you need a mentor, because truthfully, the certificates, the trainings online are much different than the practical aspect. I was lucky. I had people who have done this before me, so it was more about collaboration. I learned from collaborating. So you need a mentor, you need to collaborate a lot. So those are the two things I'll mention from my end. I'll let the other ladies speak.
Wonderful. Janine?
Yes, if I can just add to that, because I think that's very important, is the mentor thing. I think you do need to pick someone and have a good relationship with them. For me, it's good to be able to bounce ideas and questions off them. I also think we have a privacy nerd group. That's what we call it. So whenever there's anything that's new that comes out, we all get together, whether it's over supper or coffee, and start discussing and what could the possible outcomes be and how would this practically be implemented. And I think that's the main, it's a key thing in my journey, is to be able to share and to work together, to collaborate, as Eddie de Jong said, where you can sort of argue these points and really like put a proper thinking to them. So for me, it was definitely that. And then also just read as much as you can. So the certifications are great. It's very good to have the backing of those certifications and belonging to those bodies. You also, my advice is to subscribe to quite a few alerts where you can get updates. And set aside, I normally do an hour to 2 every night. Just before I go to bed, I catch up on all the news and that's going on worldwide, because as we know, a lot of these, well, we know GDPR has extraterritorial scope, but a lot of these, the privacy laws are having quite a big impact on businesses that are performing internationally. So it's good to keep abreast of local and international news.
Sorry, and to you, Nosipo, thank you for that, Janine.
So for me, before we get into the qualifications and studying and all of that, I just think what is important is to have passion for this field, because it would require you to just not think in a one-dimensional way. Also, you would have to work as an enabler. So if you understand that as a data protection officer, you are an enabler. You need to enable business to carry out their processes in a manner that complies with the data protection laws. So if you position yourself in that particular manner, or if you are someone who thinks like that, who is forward thinking, who is proactive in how they view compliance and legislation, then that's a good start for me. Then you can then go into getting the certification. It helps if you do have a regulatory compliance background, or being able to articulate and read legislation and really understand the spirit of these legislations, because you are put in a position of advisory. You yourself need to be able, as Janine said, I think one of the things that are lacking in the legal industry is just being able to simplify these complex legislation. So if you're someone that loves that kind of exercise, to be able to simplify legislation and simplify processes and simplify a way forward, so that's a good start. And of course, I think the panel has said here that you can go get these certifications and everything, but just forward thinking and not thinking that this career is just like very one-dimensional. It's one way. You have to find creative ways to fit into different environments. When I started, I didn't even know about privacy and being a privacy officer, but for some reason I was curious, and I was trying out different things in my career, and I landed here, and that's where I found this space, and I fell in love with it.
Wonderful. And I agree with all of you. Certifications are great. They're certainly a good building block if you're interested, even a good way to ascertain whether you are actually interested in the field of data privacy or not. One of the things that I find, even in my field, I also do training on data protection as well as part of my job. A lot of people assume that getting the certificates is all you need to become an expert. It is incorrect. Similar to how I say, when you finish law school, you don't automatically become the best lawyer. You become a lawyer, but there's a lot of practice that needs to be put into the field. There's a lot of understanding of the legal background, the machinations of data protection within the relevant, whether it's an institution that you're working with or whatever it is, an understanding of technology as well is required. So it's not just about going out and saying, okay, I've done this certification, now I'm an expert. It's work and time. I think puts you to that field. And one of the things that I've noted as well from Janine, Edidiong, and Mosipo is again, issues of communication. These are some of the soft skills that are never really articulated by people in data protection, but you need to be able to convince, whether you're in private sector, your board, you need to be able to convince people that they're not compliant, and this is why they need to be compliant, and this is the sort of investments that they need to make. If you're in a policy area such as I am, or regulatory area, you also need to be able to communicate to people, data controls and data processes about their obligations, data subjects about their rights and things like this. And you need to do it in a simplified way, as has been mentioned by Janine and Nasipo. So it's not just about the certifications. And there are very many of them. I think there are some questions here about what sorts of certifications are best. And the truth is, it really depends on what works for you, the fields that you're in, the area that you want to get into, the jurisdiction as well that you'll be operating in. There's some that are basic, which are good, but really it depends on the sort of work that you want to get into. One of the other questions that I think I'd really like to understand, and Janine, you've touched on it quite well in terms of appraising yourself, taking out an hour or 2 hours every night to just read about the news and what's happening in data protection. But how do the rest of you, and Janine, feel free as well to dive in if you've got any additions. How do you keep abreast of the issues on data protection? It's constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing, especially in private sector. Private sector is very agile, and so you need to understand what's happening at all times with what's within your particular organization as well as globally. How do you keep up with that? Edidiong, I'll start with you, and then Nasipo and Janine, I'll give you a chance as well at the end.
Okay, so for myself, I've set up my Google, so it gives me alerts on what is happening in data privacy in Nigeria, across the world. At a point, I was also subscribed to OneTrust. It was giving us information of what's happening across the country. And here in Nigeria, I also have contact persons who are working with regulators. So once in a while, they call meetings, they have trainings, and so they kind of tell us the direction of where the regulators are going in the future, how we can get prepared so that we can know the trends that are coming up. So basically, those are the two ways that I get updated with data privacy trends.
On my part, I think I really believe in relationships. I really believe in communicating with the people who are in the same industry as you. So, but I think on an everyday practical level, you need to go to these regulators' websites and check what is happening. Being part of a community, I think in South Africa, we do have like a few, what do you call those, community pages on LinkedIn that focuses on the privacy. It's actually growing now. When I started, there was no such thing. I was relying on the Compliance Institute of Southern Africa just to get information. But I think now there are communities looking out for that, using LinkedIn as a tool, and also just reading, obviously, the regulatory developments and if any privacy issues come about, then you're able to pick them up.
Thank you. And Janine, if you have any comments to add on with respect to how you keep abreast of the changes?
The last thing I would say is the networking, which I mentioned earlier. So having a group of people. We also have a WhatsApp group, so we share any new cases that have come out. I must say that privacy has really been an area where people are just very excited and I'm very happy to share information on.
Thanks for this. We've mentioned about the challenges that you face in your organization generally when it comes to data protection. But what are some of your personal things that are personal to you when it comes to the journey of privacy? So not organization facing, not communications aspect, but your journey to becoming a data privacy professional. As I've mentioned, it's relatively new. It could be the lack of networks. It could be just a lack of structure when it comes to data protection, lack of knowledge. So I'd love to hear what your experience has been. I'll start with Janine, and then Edith Young, and then Nasipo.
Thank you. I think personally our biggest challenges, as I mentioned earlier, was just being able to get information with our information regulator, sort of establishing themselves and taking a little while to do that. And then it's within a company, we're all in this post-COVID phase. So companies are actually, a lot of them are just trying to recover from the damage that COVID did to their business financially. So to actually make sure that this gets the right amount of attention and the right budget allocated. So I think it's very important, the ability to get buy-in right from the very top. So from the CEOs. And I think if you don't get that buy-in from the top, you are going to carry on struggling on the journey. So you've got to get that buy-in, and then you've also got to have a very good a change management mindset and be able to bring everybody along on the journey, because that can also be challenging when you're working with people and they think, well, they don't think it's as important as you know it is. So I think those are my biggest challenges.
Thank you for that. Edith Young.
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges here, which I know every other data privacy officer here in Nigeria would face, is the fact that the regulations we have, there are lots of lacuna. We all know it's a copy of GDPR, but there are so many questions that needs to be answered. And we're taught that since 2019, there will be other regulations to fill in the gap. So what's happening now is some sort of uncertainty. So you have to either pick up some things, GDPR, or just wonder what will happen. And there was also some delay with defining what countries data could be transferred to, what could not be transferred. All of that. Basically, and then here in Nigeria, we see the law is passed. People are basically mostly ticking the box than just doing compliance, because the authorities are here to pay a visit to vicinities in order to ensure that businesses would get up. Because I know here in Nigeria, until we find the regulator in front of our front steps, a lot of businesses would not comply. So we are looking forward to that happening so that data privacy officers can be taken more seriously.
Thank you for that. It is Young. Nasipo?
I think on a personal level, one of the biggest challenges was to not leave, but sort of take a career path that is not been tried before. Because I think in the legal fraternity, you kind of know that, this is the career ladder, this is the career path that is planned out for you. But here, so you're taking a career path that is new. You also still trying to figure yourself out as to how do I fit in, and also you're changing your mind from just thinking like a lawyer to thinking like someone who is a privacy officer and who also need to being able to mitigate risk within the organization, particularly the privacy risk. So that comes with you having to be able to make other stakeholders that doesn't necessarily understand, firstly, legislation, and secondly, the privacy space that is now taking over. So the culture, so the ability to be able to change culture or to educate. So that needed to, it needed me to get out of my comfort zone and find different ways as to how do I communicate with someone who is in sales? How do I communicate with someone who is in marketing, who just want to market? Really, they want to market, and now you need to tell them they need to do this before they do direct marketing and all of those things. So it got me outside of my comfort zone and put these different hats and find a way to communicate with people in those areas.
I agree. I think data protection or privacy does teach you a lot about EQ, as well as trying to put yourself in or wear different hats to understand people's perspectives and their requirements and things like this. As lawyers, and I'll speak for myself specifically, we have a very one-track mind as to how people should understand things. And if they don't understand it as neatly as you do, then sometimes it gets frustrating, especially because this is a part of the training. You explain, it's black and white, effectively. So it's very good to know that this is a challenge that is being faced by someone else as well. As we wind up, before we open up for the questions that have been put on the chat, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the space of data protection? And if anyone has comments as well with respect to some of the thinking, or if you've touched on this about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement specifically, and how it will affect privacy in Africa, would be good to get a sense on that as well. I'll start with Nasibo, and then Janine, and end with Edition.
So some of the trends that I've noticed. So when I was doing my research, my master's research was focusing on data protection in the e-commerce space, but focusing on the African continent. Basically, the question was, if I were to put it simple and say that if someone was purchasing in an online e-commerce space, and they are sitting in South Africa, and they're purchasing in an e-commerce space that is owned by a business that is sitting in Kenya, should a data protection issue arise there, how would that be resolved? So the lack of harmonization in the African continent. So when I was doing this research, some of the countries did not have data protection in place, and some of the countries had data protection, but there were no implementation processes that were put in place. So I could say that for me, from an African continent perspective, I've noticed that there is a bit of work that is done to harmonize these data protection laws. I think with the help of the GDPR, of course, which is sort of setting the standard for this. But without getting too deep into that, in South Africa, for me, I think the trend that I've noticed is that we have come to a point where we acknowledge privacy, and we can discuss as to the issue of privacy, or how does privacy came about, and the history of privacy. But the fact that we are here today and we've acknowledged privacy as a right, not just a right that is in the Constitution, but as something that exists, and it exists indeed in the digital space as well. And beyond that, we have acknowledged that there is an enabling legislation in terms of the data protection. So it enables consumers. So consumers have rights, and individuals have rights. And for me, I think we're getting somewhere with that. The trend is that we now know that there is this digital world, and there's privacy, and there's these empowering rights that exist in that ecosystem.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Nasibo. I think it was Janine is next.
I think one of the challenges that I see that there's quite a bit of focus on now, thankfully, but it's making sure that you know who your third parties are, and what services they are doing, and what amounts of personal information do you transfer to them, and where are they sitting. So you need to know where that data is being transferred cross-border, and what controls do they have in place. So it's all good and well to make sure that you, as an organization, have everything, you're fully compliant, and you've got all your controls in place, and your security is at an A grade. But if you don't know, and you haven't done the due diligence with your third parties, you could be sitting with your biggest risks there. And we've seen it before, where it's actually been someone saying, oh, we actually didn't even know that they were processing this personal information or this data. So it's basically applying that same set of controls across to them, and not just as a once-off exercise, but continually monitoring it, So making sure that if there are changes in what they do, where they store the data, whether they're going to go and store it out of country, or whether they're putting like less strict controls in place, it's being able to know that and have a thorough understanding of your third parties.
Wonderful, and that's correct. I think a lot of problems I've seen as well in Kenya arise from people not quite understanding that even when their third-party suppliers or service providers are not compliant, that they are still liable for some of the misdeeds of these third parties. And so it's good to ensure that everything is airtight and the risks are handled and addressed from every angle. Thanks for sharing that, Janine. Edith Young?
Okay, so what I want to see is, for instance, the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation is saying that every company needs to comply with processing data of Nigerians abroad. So my thought would be, what will happen if I'm working remotely for an American company, I'm a Nigerian, and my data is breached? What's going to happen? Is there going to be, is the government going to be interested about such breaches? Is the other country going to even recognize my own regulation? So like Nosifo said, we need to have more collaborations around the laws. And then secondly, data privacy relies on data security. So as we have more and more cyber security attacks, recently here in Nigeria, 2 big companies were attacked and the data of citizens were everywhere. Some were used to open bank accounts. And you see, with that, I know that companies are going to be trying to put in place more security. They are going to take data privacy more seriously. And then again, I see in Nigeria, a lot of people are beginning to know their rights. So they are making more reports. Looking at the 2021 regulators report for Nigeria, I could see an increase in reporting of data breaches. I could also see the government becoming more interested in carrying out investigations and doling out penalties. So I'm excited, and I would like to see what the future holds with this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just with that, and this might address one of the questions that was put onto the group as to firstly the compliance of data controls and data processors and public and private institutions in Kenya, as well as a registration aspect for Kenya. So it just from my perspective, with respect to the trends that we're getting to see, the data protection Act for Kenya came into place in 2019, but we just recently had a regulation passed and is coming into effect on the 14th of July. So next month, it requires a registration of data controls and data processors, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. And so there's a big rush for people to do so. There's a lack of understanding, I guess, on how to do so, and all of this. And this has been a very big question everywhere I go, at least, is always some apprehension as to whether people will comply, whether they need to comply on the first day of registration, which is the 14th of July, which is almost impossible for everyone to come and rush and register at that place. So for the person who's asked the questions with respect to the step-by-step, it's a very simple online process. It will be open the 14th of July. You just need to go onto the website, odpc.go.ke, and fill in your details. If you're an individual, then you would put as an individual. If you're an entity, a company that is registered under the Companies Act, then you'd put up your CR12 or your registration documents, and the process is streamlined. What I would suggest for those of you who are thinking of registering for Kenya, understand what data you have. I think this is the first key step to data compliance in Kenya. Understanding the sort of data you keep, where you're keeping it, your third-party providers as well. If you're transferring information outside of the country, understanding where it is and what it is necessary. How does one gauge the readiness of public and private companies in Kenya to comply with the data protection legislation? It's difficult to understand that, and unless obviously you're at least from a regulator perspective, you're going to each and every entity. But I think one of the things that has come to light, similar to what Janine, Nosipo, and Edith Young have mentioned in their respective countries, there is an understanding of data protection laws, and that they're, in effect, there's an understanding by data subjects of their rights as data with respect to data protection and privacy. And so that's a key step. And so companies do need to acknowledge that as well, and need to ensure that they're working towards not only protecting the rights of the data subjects who've entrusted them with information, but also ensuring that they're safeguarding themselves from penalties, reputational risks, as Janine had mentioned, as well as just, ensuring that for privacy's sake, that you're keeping up with what's required. If you have cybersecurity safeguards, going that little extra mile to ensure that your data protection ready is not, it's not that much in my view. So we shall take some of the questions that have been put on the panel. I'll give this question specifically to Janine. I see that you're CIPP and CIPM as well as an FIP, same as me, which is great. What, in your view, which would be best in the African context, whether to take a CIPP which is obviously for Europe, or a CIPP US, or would it be best to have both these certifications? What's your view with respect to this?
Thank you, Rose. I think it's important to look at what areas you are covering at the moment. So if someone is working with companies that do a lot of business in Europe, then it's obviously better to go and do the CIPPE. The CIPM gives you quite a good background, and it's very practical. So what I found with the CIPPE was that it was a lot of theoretical studying and a lot of sort of legal cases and what led to the legislation coming about, and then obviously all the European the requirements. Whereas the CIPM is a lot more practical about implementing a privacy program and how you go about doing that and what are the requirements. And that also takes into account, obviously, not just GDPR, but it looks at the standards, the different standards that also take effect. So for me, it's definitely look at which areas you'll be working in, because there's obviously, as you said, the US one, and then there's the Canadian one, and there's a few others. So see which areas would best suit you. But the CIPM, I think, for any person who's implementing a program, a privacy program, this gives you the basics and helps you do that.
Thank you for that. I don't know if Edith Young or Nosipo, you have anything to add?
Not at all.
Nothing to add, Rose.
Wonderful. One of the questions that have been asked is very specific, I think, to South Africa, and perhaps we can deal with this. This is from one of the participants. She says, "Good morning to all the participants. Good morning to you. I am based in South Africa, very junior in my role in compliance. I have completed a postgrad in compliance, covering AML, board governance, and compliance management. I'm seeking the next move for getting into professional and practical experience in compliance, but I'm not very sure on the next step to take. Any advice on where to begin? I'd also I would like to also leverage the opportunity I have granted on this informal data governance project that I have. Could anyone refer me to any regulation or act to refer to as my starting point, apart from GDPR, POPI, electronic contact? I feel a bit overwhelmed and not sure where to begin." I think this is specific to the team from South Africa. So Janine or Nosipo, if you want to assist with respect to this. It's a very long question, but if you have any direction for the participant.
Janine, you can go first, or should I go first?
Happy that you go first.
Oh, okay, no problem. I think for me, it seems like there is a passion for compliance, there's a passion for governance, and there's a passion for AML in studying all of this. And I think the starting point would be, yes, I want to be a compliance officer, in which if you want to be a compliance officer, Slindile, you would then need to look for those kind of position that offers you a compliance officer role. The good thing about a compliance officer role is that you can then be able to be exposed to different kinds of legislations, not only the privacy legislations. But then I think the progression from there would be then to establish whether you want to get into an AML space, which is a very different space altogether. You also need certifications there, or you can advance yourself further within that field as well. If you want to go in there, then you would have to, unfortunately, specialize on that unless you find other means to not specialize in AML. Similarly to the privacy space, you would find yourself, if you're passionate about the privacy space, that now you are dealing with privacy matters. But as a compliance officer, if you just want a compliance officer role, you look for the compliance officer role that just requires you to do general compliance officer work, which deals with a wide range of other legislation other than the privacy legislations alone. So it's decisions. But I think the starting point, if you're still confused, starts as a compliance officer with an exposure of the privacy legislations.
Thanks for that, Janine.
I think that's great advice that Nosipa's given. The only further advice that I would give is just to get yourself involved to understand which area you specifically want to specialize in. So most companies that I know, they are very happy if people put their hand up and say, actually, could I do a little bit of this? Could I work on one of these projects in my extra time, or just dedicate a bit of time to it and see? And you'll very quickly pick up where your passion lies and go into that. And as Nosipa said, you can also decide you want to rather generalize and do the AML role with the data protection role and a couple of other roles depending what sector you're in. But definitely be the person who shows that passion, because it'll help you going forward in your career.
Wonderful, thank you. Young, do you have any tips, especially within the compliance area as well?
Okay, so compliance is a very interesting field, and it's something that one can always start with, even though you want to move into privacy later, because the core principles of compliance would also apply to driving down compliance with data as a data privacy officer. So I always advise start with compliance. If you really love it, then I'm sure you're going to love data privacy.
Absolutely. They're very similar in that respect. They're, again, advisories and issues of compliance. The Data Protection Act touch on very similar principles. So you don't have to limit yourself to one thing, but one thing will probably also lead you to your passion. So thank you for that. Just as we close, what is some of your, sorry, I see that we've got just one more question. We've got a question or a comment from Jennifer, which says, I understand that there are different areas in the data protection field. Are we able to expound on that? Does anyone have any comments with respect to this? I think I'll if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Nosipa, you mentioned about how data privacy is very broad. Are you able to just expound on the different facets that you have to deal with when it comes to data protection and data privacy within your field? And then Janine as well, and then Edith Young. Thank you.
Okay. I think mostly it depends with the industry that you're in. You find that sometimes the ICT industry needs someone who is a privacy officer, but with the knowledge of the ICT industry. So it depends with the industry that you are in. Because, for example, when you're working in a banking sector, there is a level of processing that is in the banking sector. So you become a privacy officer for the financial industry, banking sector. If you are working for an advertising company, you could just imagine there is obviously mostly marketing and dealing with consumers' concerns. And therefore, in those particular areas, you need to be a data privacy officer for the marketing industry. So I think the differentiation in our roles is that we work for different industry, and by virtue of that, then you fall into that industry. So you become a data privacy officer for a particular industry. But also besides that, there is a data privacy officers that deals with systems and technology. That's a very niche market as well, where you have to analyze data from a technology perspective and understand IT governance. So that goes with, it's a different career line as well. And obviously some people are information officer, deputy information officer, which is a role that sits at the governance level. So you must understand governance as well. So yeah, I think for me that would be the answer to that question.
Thank you. Edith Young, might you have a comment on that?
Okay, so I know in very much more developed countries, they have data analysts, they have data managers. There's also a difference between data privacy and data security, where we're talking about, well, how do we encrypt under security? How do we encrypt data? How do we protect what happens to data in the cloud? So there's a large broad space. You can also be a consultant. If you want to be here in Nigeria, they call it data privacy compliance organization, conduct audits, train organizations, and there's also a space for developers. Here in Nigeria, we start having apps where people use to, as data privacy managers, they help you with compliance, they help you open a data processing register. So you can think about a software that you can bring into the market to align with what we are all doing.
Absolutely. In this space, again, there's so much room for innovation when it comes to compliance and data protection. So there's just a vast opportunities for anyone wanting to get into data protection. Janine?
Just to agree with all of that and say there is so much, it's a very broad section, and there has been this ongoing arguments around where does the actual data protection sit? Does it sit in compliance? Does it sit in legal? Does it sit in IT? Or does it sit completely on its own? I know the GDPR calls for independence, and some of the other legislation does as well. But I think you become a jack of many trades, because you do have to know the business very well.
Absolutely. And also a different career path for those who didn't consider is in policy as well. You could be like me. I practice in data protection, but I also train in data protection. I do a lot of regulatory work as well in data protection. So there's very many areas that you can get into with respect to data protection. However, all of these, I think, require you to have just a passion and an understanding of what data protection is, especially within your organization, if you are in private sector or public sector, and an appreciation for data protection, both globally and locally within your specific countries. We don't have much time. I think we've run out of time, but just to conclude, I'll give the panelists just one parting shot for the people who want to get into privacy and on this webinar. I'll start with Edith Young, and then Janine and Nosipho, and then we shall conclude.
Okay, so privacy is here to stay. Like I said earlier, it's going to continue to evolve. We're going to see more technology. As we have more technology, there come more data privacy issues. For instance, there's a data privacy issue that is surrounding the metaverse, the NFTs. So, I mean, this is a space that you want to be. Build the passion and come join us.
Absolutely. Nosipho?
I would say from a personal level, understand that there is a data story, and the data story must represent each and every society. And you must think about, where does the data go? And why do I give my data? And why do I need to know about my rights as an individual? And also from a professional level, just understand that when you are getting into anything, any career, even this data privacy space, you must love it, you must have passion for it, then you would be able to thrive and come up with creative solutions in that way.
Thanks for that, Janine.
I think echoing what both ladies have just said, and then also just you apply it to yourself, the story to yourself. So whenever you come up with a problem, you say, how would I feel if that happened to me? Be passionate and be interested, and the people in this field are more than willing to help and answer questions. I've never met a more friendly community than people that are involved in the data privacy community, and that's internationally. So don't be scared to reach out.
This is true. I think we're always willing to learn and meet new people in the same field as well. I think one of the key takeaways that I have with respect to data privacy, I think one of the things that we don't think of is that data protection and data privacy is a very impactful area. A lot of us look for places where we can have solutions. You know, some lawyers, when they enter into the field, they're always talking about how they want to make changes and things like this. Data protection doesn't only influence organizations, but it also touches on individuals and the rights of individuals. To me, in this space, I think data protection is one of the very quick ways to have an impact on the people who you interact with in the organization, the consumers in of your organization, if you're in policy, the general public. And so for those of you who want to take it, and for those of you who want to make an impact, whether you're working in private sector, public sector, policy, whatever it is, it's one of the most rewarding fields that you will get into if you do have a passion for it. So I think with that, just to note that the panelists LinkedIn, I think their LinkedIn has been put there. So if you wish to contact any of us individually, I'm sure the panelists would appreciate having a conversation with you outside of this session. For those of you who've joined, thank you so much for joining. I hope you've gotten as much as I have from this discussions as well. And again, we're looking forward to interact outside of this. It's been lovely having all of you on here, and it's been lovely moderating this session as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And goodbye. Good day to everyone, and have a wonderful weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Goodbye. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.